Hello, and welcome to this presentation, Getting Started with the FSW, AM Modulation Depth Measurements. In this short presentation, we'll explain how to measure the modulation depth of AM signals using a Rohde Schwarz FSW series signal and spectrum analyzer. This presentation assumes a basic understanding of amplitude modulation and how AM modulation depth is measured. If you're unfamiliar with this topic, or if you'd like a brief review, you might want to watch the presentation Understanding Amplitude Modulation before beginning this presentation. AM modulation depth is one of the standard spectrum measurements on the FSW and is supported on all FSW series analyzers. This function can determine the modulation depth in percent of an AM modulated carrier. The FSW does this by placing markers on the carrier and on the upper and lower sidebands of the signal. This is normally done automatically, but it's also possible to manually place or adjust these markers. The power at each of these markers is then used to calculate and display the modulation depth. To make an AM modulation depth measurement, press the Measure Hard key and then select AM modulation depth from the list of Further Measurements. This is a standard spectrum measurement and does not require any additional hardware, software, or license code. Here we see the main AM modulation depth measurement screen. Configuration settings are accessed via the buttons on the right. The default view shows both the graphical results as well as numerical results beneath them. In the remainder of this presentation, we'll explain how to configure measurement parameters and interpret the results. The first step is manually configuring the center frequency of the signal, the span, and the resolution bandwidth. In general, span should be set to 3 to 5 times the AM modulating frequency. This is often on the order of thousands of hertz. The resolution bandwidth must be set small enough so that the carrier and the two sidebands are clearly differentiated. Using these settings for span and resolution bandwidth, we can clearly see the 3 peaks where the markers must be placed, and these settings will yield valid measurement results. If the span or resolution bandwidth are set too large, the peaks will not be clearly differentiated, and it will be impossible to get valid measurement results for modulation depth. Once center frequency, span, and resolution bandwidth are configured, markers must be placed on the carrier and on both sidebands. Pressing the Search Signals button will cause the FSW to attempt to automatically place marker 1 on the carrier and markers 2 and 3 on the sidebands. This function is accessible from within the AM Mod Depth config or directly from the main GUI. Recall that markers can also be manually placed and adjusted if necessary. One final note: if the markers are correctly placed, the distance between the carrier and either sideband will be approximately the same as the modulating frequency, in this example 1 kHz. Now let's look at an example of AM modulation depth measurement results. In the upper pane, we can see the 3 peaks, with markers placed on the carrier and on both sidebands. The numeric values of these markers are given in the table at the bottom of the screen. And in the bottom right corner, the automatically calculated value of AM modulation depth is displayed as a percentage. Let's end with a brief summary. AM modulation depth is a standard measurement supported on all Rohde Schwarz FSW series signal and spectrum analyzers. Configuring an AM modulation depth measurement is very straightforward. First, the center, span, and resolution bandwidth are manually configured to match the characteristics of the AM modulated signal. Next, markers are placed on the carrier and the sidebands in order to measure their power. The Search Signals function can be used to place these markers automatically, but manual placement and adjustment of these markers is also possible. The FSW then uses these marker values to automatically calculate the modulation depth, which is displayed as a percentage. This concludes our presentation, Getting Started with the FSW, AM Modulation Depth Measurements. If you'd like to learn more about other spectrum measurements, or about spectrum analyzers from Rohde & Schwarz, please see the links in the video description. Thanks for watching.